Okay, thank you so much. Hello and welcome to the Manhasset Chamber of Commerce Business Card Exchange. I'm Elizabeth Johnson and I'm the co-president of the Manhasset Chamber and host of a new television show called From the Source. As a member of the Chamber, events like these are what makes the Chamber special. The Manhasset Chamber is more than 70 years old. It's here for merchants of the area, but it's now grown to so much more. As Chamber President, I want the world to know that Manhasset is a thriving and vibrant residential and commercial area that is dedicated to quality of life and style, which is evidenced by the businesses here today. Some of the initiatives the Chamber has been working on include creating a series of mini segments on North Hempstead Television, which discuss why you want to be a member of the Chamber and features businesses that are currently in the Chamber. A series is also going to be held on public access television. We're working with MapTunes, which literally is putting your business on the map. It's being created this year and will come out in September. And every single household in Manhasset will have it, including realtors, as well as churches and businesses in the area. We have supported a wastewater survey, which is being taken place right now. That's going to probably change what we look like in the future. The Americana right now is in the process of hooking up a sewer system. Beautification and making the area inviting and a place that people want to stop and shop is paramount in increasing business. We are working diligently with the town of North Hempstead. They actually stepped up to the plate and helped us out with filling every single one of our 20 some odd planters with beautiful flowers. They are currently watering and keeping that beautiful for us to enjoy this summer. And I want to thank Veronica Lurvy, who is our councilwoman that helps spearhead that. This evening, I am so incredibly excited to introduce a special guest speaker. This man is amazing. He is our neighbor. He is the epitome of what an entrepreneurial spirit is. He was raised here on the North Shore in Port Washington and has created several businesses. He is a leader in the financial industry and has established an annual hedge fund summit called SALT, which is different from the SALT that we're all suffering from, which is state and local tax limits. He's the author of 4 books, one of which you have received this evening. He has written Goodbye, Gordon Gekko, How to Find Your Fortune Without Losing Your Soul. I mean, I love these titles. The Little Book of Hedge Funds, What You Need to Know About Hedge Funds, but the managers won't tell you. This book my daughter shared with me. Hopping Over the Rabbit Hole, How Entrepreneurs Turn Failure into Success. And the latest one this evening that we received, Trump, the Blue Collar President. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you this evening, Anthony Scaramucci.
Elizabeth, thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you. Did my mom write all of that for you, Elizabeth? Because you read that exactly the way my mom would have written it. So thank you. So thank you. I'm sorry my back is to you guys, but so what I would like to do, if it's okay, talk for maybe 10 or 15 minutes and then take questions, because I think it's always a lot more fun. And I'm just looking out at the room, and you look a lot friendlier than the White House press corps. Just looking out at the room, you look a little less drunk than the White House press corps too. So the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the title of the book, Trump, the Blue Collar President. So I was trying to come up with a controversial title. I certainly know that the president is filled with a lot of controversy, and I figured if I called him the Blue Collar President, it would trigger all the liberals, and so of course it did. And people excoriate me for calling Trump a blue collar president. They're like, how could you call this guy a blue collar president? If you go to Trump's apartment, and if you've ever seen it on the internet, it looks like Louis XIV smoked crystal meth and then decorated the apartment. So you know he himself is not blue collar. But the point of the book was that on the campaign trail, I did 26 campaign stops with President Trump, then candidate Trump. We visited probably, I would say on those 26 stops, we did like 3 or 4 at a time, probably visited 80 different towns. I brought Johnny McEntee with me, who's now at Skybridge, who was the president's body man for 2 or 3 years. We'd say it was like 2 or 3 stops per visit. And what we saw on the campaign was very eye-opening. It was town after town of people that felt that the establishment, the political establishment, had left them behind through the forces of globalism, through the forces of literally not caring. We turned a group of aspirational working class families in 35 short years into desperational working class families. And so many of us here that grew up in this town, this was an amazing town to grow up in because we had a very big mix of people, ethnicities, as well as income strata and so on and so forth. But in a lot of the towns we went to visit, these were people that were just looking for hope. They were not white nationalists. They were not deplorable people. They were not ethnocentrists or anything like that. What they were people that wanted hope, they wanted an opportunity, they wanted a job, and they wanted to better their families. And so for whatever reason, President Trump saw that, and that was at a time when there was a vacuum of advocacy by the establishment. And we don't need to go back to the 2016 campaign, but I think these 2 facts are worth speaking about. The president, Michael Moore, who was a classic liberal, did a number of documentaries that were anti-establishment, very left-leaning guy, lives in Flint, Michigan, or lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He said, hey, you guys got to wake up. He's going to win Michigan. And I don't want him to win Michigan, but I'm going from town to town, and there's one Trump-Pence sign after another in Michigan. And Johnny, I think you'll remember this night. You remember it was Manchester, New Hampshire, flight to Grand Rapids, Michigan at like 1 o'clock in the morning, right? Right, 2 or 3 in the morning. And so the president was leaving New Hampshire. He had already done Michigan. He had gone to Michigan 7 or 8 times. And it was 10, 11 o'clock at night in New Hampshire. And he wanted to return to Michigan for another stop up in Michigan. And the advanced staff was calling around for a microphone and the blue bunting and the flags. And I think the plane landed 2 o'clock in the morning. He had 6,000 or 7,000 people waiting for him in Michigan. Secretary Clinton, she went 1 time to Michigan, and that was after that stop, and it was literally only 24 hours before the polling opened. In the state of Wisconsin, the Democrats thought that they owned that state. That state is a blue-collar state, traditional labor state, had not gone for a Republican in 32 years since Ronald Reagan. Secretary Clinton didn't go to the state once. President Trump went to the state 7 or 8 times. Same issue in Pennsylvania. And so the point of the book was this was a person who was living in Louis XIV's apartment. I mean, the apartment's ridiculous, but he understood what was going on in America, and he understood that desperation. I want to talk a little bit about the trade situation because the president is in Osaka. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Middle East situation because I just returned this morning from the Bahrain Peace Conference. Jared Kushner and Secretary Mnuchin invited me out there for the conference. They wanted some help with the media out there, so I attended. And so what Elizabeth left out of my introduction, which you didn't need to, Elizabeth, I was at the White House for 11 days. You could have said that, Elizabeth, okay? It was totally fine, okay? I got my butt fired after 11 days, okay? And let me tell you what I did, because I think this is important for everybody in the room. I trusted somebody whose family had a relationship with my family. And they lived in Oyster Bay. He was an Italian kid, and I transferred a relationship that my dad had with his dad, and I trusted him. And I said something off the record that I thought was off the record, and he recorded it, and he ran to CNN, and he said he was going to put it out on CNN. I said, hey, you're going to end up getting me fired for that. And it is a fireable offense. You can't do in the situation I'm in is ever make the president look bad. So I tell younger people, when I meet with younger people and I speak at colleges, I own the mistake. I trusted somebody that I should not have trusted. And unfortunately, in Washington, Johnny can tell you this as well as anybody, Harry Truman was right about Washington. In Washington, if you want a friend, buy a dog, okay? Buy a dog, okay? Even the dogs. It's an old joke, but even the dogs are biting in Washington these days, even the dogs. But, you know, he ran to CNN. I said, hey, this is going to be a fireable offense for me. And lo and behold, I got fired. And so there's young people in the room, so 3 lessons about that, okay? Lesson number 1, be accountable for your mistakes. You don't do this and blame other people or that's guy's fault. No, it's my fault. I trusted the wrong person. He did something to me. I put the president in a bad situation. John Kelly fired me. And look, it is what it is. It was a painful period of time. You know, my wife and I were going through trouble. She's here tonight. Put your hand up there, babe. Okay, so fix that. Nikki, wave. Okay, my son's here. So, you know, what you do is when things really matter, you got to get your relationships to work and you got to own up to and be accountable for your mistakes. Second thing, for younger people, okay, very, very important, you forgive yourself. One of the biggest things you have to do in your life is when you make a mistake, and a lot of us in the room grew up in a Judeo-Christian rituals, Judeo-Christian sort of methodology and teachings, and we learn about forgiveness and redemption and all those concepts. Forgive yourself. You know, I don't wake up in the morning and kick myself because 2 years ago I made a mistake in the White House that got me fired. Okay, why do that to yourself? Take the millstone of regret or whatever's gone wrong in your life and drop it and move forward. And the third thing is go on the Stephen Colbert show and make fun of it, okay? When I got on his show, and this is a funny story, and I will talk about the trade and this other stuff. So he was lighting me up. I mean, you have no idea, okay? My oldest son, my son AJ, who's out in California now, he's just finishing his first year at Stanford Business School. He put a compendium of late night comedy attacks on me, which I should probably show here one night. It was like really funny. And Stephen Colbert was, I mean, vicious. I mean, lighting me up. He had cartoons of me. I mean, the whole thing was crazy. So I'm fired, and I called his agent, and I got his phone number, his cell phone. His agent like, are you going to really call? I said, yeah, I'm going to call. So I called him. He thought it was a spoof call. You know, I got on the phone. I said, it's Anthony Scaramucci. He goes, this is the Mooch? I said, yeah. No, it can't be the Mooch. I said, yeah, I just got your phone number from your agent. He said, okay, let me call my agent. I'm going to call you right back. He didn't know it was me, right? Then he called me back, and he's like, okay, come on the show. And so I went on the show, and you meet with the people that don't like you. That's another thing. What's the big deal? Okay, we're all Americans. We got to figure out a way to get along. So I went on the show, and he said, Anthony, he said, Mooch, did you think you're going to last a long time? I said, I thought I was going to last longer than a carton of milk in the refrigerator, but what can I tell you, okay? These things happen, okay? So you own your mistakes. But here's the last thing, and this is the most important thing. No grudges and no whining and no complaining, okay? If you are in politics or sports, no grudges, no whining. I tell people, if you go into the NFL, you put a helmet on and pads, and you're running across the secondary, and Ronnie Lott comes out of nowhere and knocks you out, and you've got a concussion, you can't complain about that. Okay, so I took the job. I was going there to do the job with good intentions, and I made a mistake, and I got hit in the head, and so that's it, big deal, let's move on. Last piece of this story, when John Kelly left the White House and John fired me, I called him. Another guy that thought he was being spoofed. This is really funny. He called back to the office. His assistant said, we think Anthony Scaramucci called. Oh, yeah, he just called. Okay, hold on for General Kelly. He got on the phone with me. I said, John, I know you fired me, but you're on the speaking tour, and I have a conference in Las Vegas, and I'd like you to come and speak, and I frankly would like to interview you on stage. Really? I said, yeah, let's do it. He says, okay, we should probably have lunch first. And so we had a 3-hour lunch. Okay, I had my piece, he said his piece. But let me tell you 2 things about John Kelly, which I think are relevant to this story. In addition to him being a great American, he's a 4-star decorated U.S. Marine. He spent 40 years in public service in the U.S. Marine Corps. last part, and it's a tragic part, he lost his son in Iraq. And it makes me sad, so I'm expressing it to you. He stepped on a landmine. John told me the whole story. They were searching a minefield, and the first thing they did was they checked it for metal mines, and they said, okay, the minefield is clear of metal mines. Unfortunately now, the insurgents were making ceramic-based mines, and so they needed to do a sonar run of the minefield, and unfortunately, their signals of communication got crossed. They thought they had done a sonar run of the minefield, and so they cleared for the Marines to go through the minefield. The first Marine into the minefield was his son. He stepped on a mine and died instantly. It's a very sad story. John Kelly is an American hero, and I'm at peace with John Kelly. He's at peace with me, and we have a good time together, you know. And I'm bringing him and Jim Mattis to Abu Dhabi in November. So no grudges, no complaints. You move forward with your life. Okay, so let's talk about trade. I want to talk a few minutes about trade. I want to talk a little bit about the Mideast, and I'll take any question, and then you guys can leave with my book. Now, here's the deal with my book, okay? I wrote an international bestseller, and if you don't believe me, come into my basement. My wife will show you every copy that I bought, okay? My wife is so sick of this book, you have no idea, okay? So here's the rule with the book. It doesn't necessarily have to go to your house, but it cannot come back to my house, okay? So if you're going to throw the book out, that's great, or you're going to leave it here, but please don't send it back to us. But if you read the book, let me know what you think about it. I think it was very honest. I tried to write a very honest account of what I saw and what I think is going on. Okay, so trade. Just a few minutes on that. I think it's very, very important. So when you're watching TV or you're understanding the context of what is going on, Johnny will remember this. The president has a long or short attention span, Johnny. What would you say? Everybody knows the answer. You don't have to answer. So Stephen Mnuchin said to me, okay, you're really good on this trade stuff. You're going to brief the president on trade. I said, okay, great. He says, you got 3.5 minutes. I said, okay, we're going to do 40 to 70 years of trade history in 3.5 minutes. Okay, let me see if I can do this. And so we were on the plane. You know how he sits you across from him at the dining table. And I said, okay, listen, Mr. President, and you have to talk to Trump and President Trump in the following way. You have to tell him a story. The worst thing you could do with President Trump is lecture him, because he'll tune out and he doesn't want to hear a lecture from you. So you have to tell him a story. H.R. McMaster was having trouble with that, because he used to always say, Mr. President, let me tell you the difference between a Shia and a Sunni. And Trump didn't want you to know that he didn't know the difference, or he didn't want you to know that he may not have known the difference. So he would don't want to listen to you. So I started out with a story. And so what I said to the president is, at the end of the Second World War, the United States was 60% of the world's economic output, and we were 1.5% of the world's population. I just want to put you back to the end of the Second World War, September of 1945. And the rest of the world was devastated. We had bombed out Europe, we had wiped out Japan, parts of Northern Asia, including mainland China. And so Richard Nixon and a group of House of Representative members in 1946 went to Europe. And when they came back to Europe, they went directly to the White House and they met with Harry Truman and Dean Atkinson, and they said, this is a complete and unmitigated disaster. People are starving, they're looting, they have no industrial complex, it's been completely destroyed, and oh, by the way, Stalin is making a move on Eastern Europe. If we don't do something to help the Europeans and the Asian industrial democracies, this is going to be very, very bad for the United States. And so Dean Atkinson actually came up with an idea to refortify these areas, and he wanted to call it the Truman Plan. And Truman said, no, they hate my guts up on the Hill. We can't call it the Truman Plan. He said, Mr. President, then would it be okay if we call it the Atkinson Plan? And then Harry Truman looked at him and, no, they hate your guts way more than they hate my guts. So who should we use? And they used George Marshall. Now, some of you guys will remember that from school. George Marshall was a decorated 5-star general, chief of staff of the Army. And even though he was a Democrat, he was well respected by the Republicans. And so they brought him in to explain the plan. And he went up to Harvard University in June, I think, of 1948. And he gave a commencement address about the rebuilding of Europe and North Asia. Why is this so important? It's the first time that a vanquishing nation repaired and rebuilt a vanquished nation. $13.7 billion was expended. To put it in terms that you could understand for today, in 2019 dollars, that's about $200 billion. As a percentage of GDP, U.S. GDP, it would be about $900 billion of infrastructure spending spent by the American government outside the United States to fortify the industrial democracies. You have to think about how staggering that was. Second piece of that story, Mr. Trump, is that we unevened every single trade deal. The General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs in 48 and 49, we said, here's the deal. You're going to trade with us, and your goods and services are going to flow freely into the U.S., relatively untaxed, relatively unembargoed. Our goods and services are going to be stopped at your border. You can tax them, tariff them, and embargo them. As an example, today, if you want to sell a car, you're an American automaker, you want to sell a car in Great Britain, 10% tariff. A British car to the United States, 2.5% tariff. The trade system is asymmetrically biased against the United States. We did that for a geostrategic reason to protect the world from communism. We also did it for a reason where we wanted to grow the middle class around the world to suppress conflict. And so we built the UN and the World Bank and the IMF and all of these great systems to fortify the New World Order. The process of this, though, ladies and gentlemen, created a deleterious outcome for the United States because our political leadership left unchecked the original plan. And so as the plan was unfolding, we left it in place, and then when the wall came down in 1989 and China wanted to get into World Trade Organization, we left ourselves in an asymmetric position. Moreover, in order to help the Mexicans, frankly, in the North American Free Trade Agreement, we did a similar strategy with them. After the signing of that deal, the United States lost 65,000 factories. They migrated off the shore of the United States. We hollowed out every industrial and every manufacturing center, and we blighted the small towns and the flyover states, which contributed to the opioid crisis and the increase in government transfer payments. This was a mistake. This was a malpractice by establishment political leadership, both Republican and Democratic leadership. Okay, two other quick things happened. It's worth noting. The United States allowed the Chinese to tie their currency to our currency. We were devaluing our currency because of deficit spending, and the United States should not have allowed that because as the Chinese were becoming an industrial economy, their currency should have rallied into that. But we allowed them to tie their currency to our currency. Now, why did we do that? We wanted to create another adversary for the Soviet Union. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, we allowed them to continue to do that. You see the malpractice? Government moved too slowly. The Germans, when Trump is going off on the Germans in the EU, I got to explain to you why. Okay, the Germans watched what the Chinese did. They said, okay, this is going to be great for us as well. We want to create an industrial society. So they tied themselves up and they created the euro. The euro is not a federalized currency. It's a fixed exchange rate mechanism in Europe. So what the Germans did was they took their northern industrial economy and they tied it to all of those southern European countries that we all left, okay? Those southern European countries that are retiring at age 55, drinking ouzo, swimming naked in the Mediterranean. They said, let's tie ourselves to those guys because they have to devalue every once in a while. And so what the Germans did, Mr. Trump, is they created a currency that trades at a 22 to 25% discount to the Deutschmark. You see what they did? And they created an export boom and a mercantilist system. They're the only Western European nation that's running a trade surplus, a budget deficit surplus. There's several running trade surpluses, but a budget surplus, and they're at full employment. And they did that through full-blown currency rigging and currency manipulation. Okay, so how's that? I mean, it was like 7 or 8 minutes, but you got the point, right? And so what the president said is, okay, we got to fix this. He knew intuitively that we had to fix it. He wrote about it 30 years ago, but I explained to him the dynamic with the currency. So when you hear Trump railing on the EU and he says they're doing a number on us and all that stuff, it's because of this, okay? And so he's trying to fix a 4-decade problem And he's using Twitter and all those other rhetorical devices that he uses. I mean, sometimes it's crazy, but other times it's very effective. Last thing I want to say, and then I'll take questions, is the Middle East. We've had an intractable problem in the Middle East. Since the formation of the State of Israel and the Palestinian refugee crisis and the lack of statehood for the Palestinians, there has been a crisis in the Middle East. There's complications in many areas of the Middle East, but that is one piece of the Middle East. Boy, if we can fix that, it will have very positive transformational effects for the society. The three great religions, Islam, Catholicism, and Christianity, and obviously Judaism, all come from that area of the world. Okay, one of the reasons why the Israelis haven't been attacked or been nuked is because all of those religious sites are on top of each other and they can't do it. Okay, but if we could figure out a way to create some level of peace and some level of harmony in that area and heal the biblical area of the world where all of these religions have come from, it will affect positively and very beneficially the 7.5 or 7.2 billion people. Jared Kushner, a lot of people don't like Jared. I actually have a lot of respect for Jared. I think Jared is at a disservice because he's related to the president. And so because he's related to the president, the opponents of the president knock him. But he's actually an incredibly smart guy. And if he wasn't related to the president, he'd actually be more effective and more influential. But over the last 6 months, he wrote a 140-page economic plan to help solve the Palestinian crisis. Coupled to that economic plan, there's a political plan that will be dropped on the world after the Israeli elections. And those 300 pages are very detailed, very exhaustive political and economic plan that could right-size the problem there if the Palestinians are willing. One of my observations about politics, and I hate politics, I just got to be honest with you. I mean, I got an 11-day PhD on how these guys operate in Washington, okay? I hate politics, but one of the things that you need is you need somebody that wants to put themselves in a service position. See, the big problem with our establishment is they want to rule, and they want to stay in a perpetually ruling situation over the nation. No term limits, sit there, cater to the lobbyists, cater to the special interests, lack of courage and lack of care for the American people. But we know when we have servant leaders, that's when we're at our best, that's when we're at our finest. And the Palestinians need one person, they need one servant leader right now to come in, not care, because what's happened is the money goes in, Abbas, Arafat, they've taken the money and they've moved it into Swiss bank accounts for their families. Okay, that's desperation and a lack of hope, but you need somebody to turn the switch there. But here's the last thing I'll say before I take questions, and you guys can ask me anything. I'll talk about anything. I don't know the difference between on and off the record anyway, so you could just ask me anything and I'll tell you what I think. But here's the thing that you need to know. In 72 or 71 years since the formation of Israel, no presidential administration has come up with this detailed of a plan. No presidential administration has offered this level of hope in that area of the world. So if you don't like the president, that's fine. I respect that. And it is what it is. A lot of people don't like him. But I will tell you this, there's a lot of stuff that he's doing that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so with that, I'll take any question. Talk about anything you guys want. Yes, in the back, sir.
If you had one piece of advice for President Trump, what would it be?
If I had one piece of advice for President Trump, what would it be? So my issue with the president, well, there's a couple of issues there, is I like a lot of what he is doing. It's a what and how situation for me. What he is doing, if you said, okay, the economy is stronger, the African American and Hispanic American unemployment numbers are at all-time lows. You have a 5.4% increase in wages. He's worked hard to deregulate aspects of the system to unleash growth and entrepreneurship. He's trying to cut a deal with the North Koreans. He's trying to balance and add more symmetry to the trade situation. All of those things, what he is doing, very, very positive. How he is doing it, okay, and some of you are Italian here, is guguzzt, okay, it's tutte pazze, okay? He's going after people viciously on Twitter. He's attacking people ad hominemly. And what he's doing is he's creating too much coarseness from the top, from the bully pulpit of the presidency, and it's turning off a lot of people. And so it's not just the cable news people on MSNBC or CNN. When you go look at the polling data, given the economic achievements and some of the things that he's done as it relates to foreign policy, he should be in the mid-50s on his approval rating. But it's the nastiness and it's the style that's holding him back. And so what I would say to the president, not that he would ever listen, but I would say to the president, go into the State of the Union mode. If any of you saw his State of the Union address, it was actually very engaging. It was very inclusive. It was very American. He touched on a lot of things about the United States that we could all agree on. And if he went in a direction that way, he would get those approval ratings up a lot. That would be my best recommendation to him, sir. It's a how versus a what situation with the president. Yes, sir. I'll take yeah, I'll get to you after. Yep.
In the next 15 months, do you think he can change?
He's 73 years old. No, he's not going to change. But there's one thing that I can tell you about the president and other people here that know him even better than I know him. Nobody likes to win like this guy. Okay, and so if that's what it takes, he will do that. I watched during the Kavanaugh situation, a lot of the people that were handling comms on the Justice Kavanaugh situation told the president to dial back on Twitter, dial back some of the rhetoric right now, and he did do that. And I don't know if you noticed, his approval ratings went up. He had a 5% surge in approval ratings. When the CNN, MSNBC, hate Trump media all day turned their turn away from the president and started shooting at Justice Kavanaugh, and he wasn't tweeting, the approval ratings went up about 6 points. So I don't know if he can change, but I know he likes to win. So that could possibly curb some of the stuff that he does. Yes, sir.
Could you explain the thinking behind moving the capital of Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and why was there such a big deal about it, such a hubbub?
So, I mean, you know, it's very complicated, sir. I've been to Israel about 6 times. My last trip was with Governor Huckabee. I have a pretty good idea of the security situation there. The American presidents, the last 3, have promised to move. When Israel was formed, they declared Jerusalem the capital. As you know, if you look at the geography, some people call it the West Bank, other people call it Judea and Samaria. It's adjacent to Jerusalem. So parts of the old city are tied to the Muslim community, and parts of the old city are tied to the Christian and the Jewish community. And so, but the Israelis declared Jerusalem, the ancient city from biblical times, to be their capital. And obviously the Arabs were very, objectionable to that. After the '67 war, there was sort of a unstated peace and an idea that the United States would not recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, so we put our embassy in Tel Aviv. And we thought that that would settle people down. As the times changed, 3 American presidents promised to move it. Okay, and so President Trump decided to move it, because I know the guy's personality very well. He has put chips on the table for Benjamin Netanyahu and the state of Israel, like moving the embassy, declaring Jerusalem the capital city, and making a declaration that the Israelis, for the purposes of the United States at least, perhaps not the UN, have effectively adjoined the Golan Heights, which was part of Syria. They took that, I think, after the '72 war, the '73 Yom Kippur War. And if you've been to the Golan Heights, which I have been to, it is a very high piece of land that the Israelis cannot afford to cede to the Syrians or to a potential enemy to Israel. And so I think those chips were put on the table, okay, as concessions to the Israelis. And what you'll see after the Israeli elections, the concessions that the president would like to make to the Arab community and the Palestinians. And so I've read the plan. I'm not at liberty to discuss that plan with you, but I think once you see the plan, you'll be impressed with the fact that there is some symmetry to the plan. But one of the pieces in the thing that the Israeli government wanted, at least the government that's now led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, was the movement of that. And now people said that there would be terrorist crisis, there'd be all kinds of ridiculous craziness, and of course there wasn't. Yes, Paul, also known as Eamon.
How are you? Good. So who needs to deal more, the Chinese or us? Who's fill in the blank.
So the Chinese need the deal. Who needs the deal, the trade deal more, the Chinese or us? So the Chinese need the deal more. I'm not saying that as an American-centric person. I'm saying that as an objective capital management person, somebody that's running $12 billion and has to look at this stuff not through a partisan lens, but through a lens of objectivity. The Chinese need the deal more, primarily because the Chinese are not where they would like to be in terms of their economic growth. Now, here is the misunderstood secret in the West about China. The Western media has overly sung the praises of the Chinese economic miracle. It isn't a fascinating miracle that they've been able to grow to the second largest economy since they started their reforms 40 years ago. But they have about 900 million people in abject poverty. They've got about 400 million people that are living in a Western-style capitalist consumption-based system. So they have a very uneven system going on in there. And when you go to China, Eamon, what you find is that pockets of it are very modern, pockets of it are very efficient, and pockets of it are very, very inefficient. And so the secret here is that, like the Japanese 30 years ago, when people were saying in the media that the Japanese economy is going to overpower the US, the Chinese have a hollower, weaker story than you would actually believe from reading the press. And so they need the deal. Their economy's been hobbled. I'll get to you. I'm just going to answer the last piece of this question. The economy's been hobbled. The currency's been hobbled. One thing I am very worried about, and without getting into the details, okay, is Huawei. Because if you talk to the people in the NSA, and you talk to the National Security Council of the United States, and you talk to the people that really know, Huawei, okay, is a backdoor channel into the Chinese government. And if they put those 5G mechanisms, just understand that 4G and 5G, it's not a 20% move in speed. It's a 1,000% move in speed. It is a quantum leap in technology. And if you allow the Huawei equipment into the Western industrial democracies, every piece of information, every shred of top secret information is going to flow back into China. Okay, so we have to prevent that from happening, or we have to get a gauge on that. And so for those reasons, I think the president's actually done a very good job. And by the way, Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader Schumer have agreed with the president on this. And if you've read through the security briefings, you too would agree on this. But they need the deal more than us, and I predicted that deal will get done. Yes, sir.
I have a question about the press. We watch Fox News in the morning, the same day we watch CNN at night. We think we're living on different planets. I've been a journalism for years.
Now you sound like President Trump, because he watches CNN at night. You know that, right, John?
I'm not sure exactly how we got there, the press, and what happened to journalism, which used to be more independent, more independent.
Well, I mean, someone's saying in the back here that journalism is dead. So it's very different. I think the operating standard, the Columbia style, like if you go to the old school Columbia School of Journalism and you read the almost Hippocratic oath of journalism, that is completely dead, sir. You're right about that. But here's what happened. Okay, we started the process of fragmentization as a result of the influx of technology. And so now many of us are getting our news off a phone. We have 200 channels versus the 7 channels that we grew up with. We've got all of this different media coming into us, and we also have, frankly, fake media. There's going to be deep fakes soon. Does anybody here know what a deep fake is? Okay, so they'll take my face, they'll superimpose it on someone else's body, they'll synthesize my voice, and it'll look like a real video. It'll look like I'm saying something, I hate President Trump, when I don't hate him, and there it is, and it's being plastered everywhere. That's coming. That's going to come in 2000. I'll answer your question in a second. That's coming in 2020. So what's happening is, because of this fragmentization, these guys are now going for eyeballs, and they're going for categories. Okay, so the media is totally split up. The CIA station chief in Manhattan, I got to know him after 9/11. I'm not going to divulge his name. But the CIA station chief said to me that the best piece of news, if you really want objective news, is the French newspaper, the Le Monde, the Parisian newspaper, the Le Monde. You can download it on your phone, get the English version of it. The French absolutely care less about our politics. The British care about our politics, the Germans care about our politics, the French could care less. So they write very objectively about what goes on in the United States. But that is long gone. That is long, long gone. And I will tell you why I dislike elements of the president's Twitter use. I support his independence on Twitter because what the president has done is nothing short of magnificent. He has 115 million unique users on his social media platform. So he's reaching a Super Bowl style audience every time he tweets. Okay, and Johnny can tell you that one of the fun things on the campaign plane would be he would say, watch this, and he would be hate watching CNN, and he would fat finger something, and then all of a sudden it would hit the satellite and bounce into CNN, and then the poor journalist is like, breaking news, and Trump hates my guts. Okay, you know what I mean? And we would be on, am I making this up? And we'd be on the campaign plane laughing. That's Trump, you know what I mean? When Trump's sending out tweets that he's going to be president forever, that's just sticking a finger in the eye of those people. He's not going to be president forever. There was a question here, and then I'll take yours. Yes, what was your question, sir?
Going back to the 5G base in the United States and China, I'm familiar with that the Chinese, they stole patents from U.S. companies to, obviously, make their races. Does the U.S. on the government side have cases go against that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's over. I mean, so this is again, the gentleman is bringing up the Chinese, the United States, and the Western capitalist model was about investment in R&D. The Chinese, in order to catch up, they believed in RD&T. What is T? That's theft. Okay. And so what they did was they started stealing our secrets and gutting ourselves through hacking and cyber piracy and all these other things. And unfortunately, we left that stuff unchecked. The political leadership in the establishment is failing the country. $22 trillion of debt. We killed 1 million people in the Middle East on a path to nowhere. 70,000 servicemen and women died in the last were wounded in the last 18 years. 7,000 servicemen and women dead. 22 are dying a day from post-traumatic stress. Our educational system, K through 12 on the public side, is ridiculously uneven. It may be good here in Port Washington or Manhasset or Garden City, but trust me, it is failing in the inner cities of Detroit, South LA, et cetera. We have no industrial policy. We have no infrastructure policy. There's no 25-year plan for America because we have a group that believes in ruling as opposed to serving. Because a 25-year plan would present complex problems and likely get a few people voted out of office. And so therefore, they're trying to perpetuate themselves. And so they've left this completely unchecked. Okay, so if you dislike the president, and some of you should because of the rhetoric, and I get that, you have to at least give him credit for exposing this stuff and shining a light on it, so now that we can at least, as a group of citizens, focus on it and try to find people that will do a better job. So the answer to the question is no, we've lost that already, and all we can do is tighten that up. Okay, you're not going to win a case in the world court against the Chinese. Over here, yes, sir. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yep. Doc, how are you?
Good, pretty good.
Good.
I'm perplexed by why the census asking if you're a citizen. For instance, if you're a member of this club and they want to do infrastructure or something, and they ask you if you're a member, what do you think? But it's so offensive for the American government to ask people if they're citizens of this country and what they would like to do with it. But it just perplexes me. And the Supreme Court comes out and agrees with that. I'm at a loss.
Okay, so you want me to comment and offer my analysis on that? Okay, so the question that the good doctor is referencing is about the census, and obviously the Supreme Court ruled today that you can't ask the question if someone is a citizen or not. And so that's part of the culture war. Unfortunately, we're in a dogged fight in the country as it relates to the country's culture. We're also in a dogged fight as it relates to immigration. And so Justice Roberts, who was put in place by George W. Bush, has often sided with the liberals. And so if he were in the room with us right now, he would say that he's trying to do that to offer balance to the court and offer integrity. And if you read the opinion, I didn't read the entire opinion, but somebody briefed me on it, he's trying to push the decision down to the lower courts. Okay, he wants to leave the Supreme Court out of it because he's super worried about the politicization of the Supreme Court. As an example, he judged the Obamacare a tax so that it could go through because he didn't want to abrogate the legislature and the executive branch, which would have ultimately put the court in jeopardy. So you may not like the specific decisions, but I do like Justice Roberts for the following reasons. Ladies and gentlemen, your liberty and your individual freedom is tied to one thing in our society, okay, and that is the checks and balances of the society. When I met with Justice Scalia a few years ago over a bowl of pasta, which was one of the more fun things that I did, he said to me, Anthony, he's passed now, but he said that the North Korean Constitution, the Russian Constitution, the Venezuelan Constitution, they have the same flowery language about human rights and liberty. But what has protected the United States are the checks and balances in that system. And so I applaud the justice, even though I don't like some of the specific decisions. And certainly we should be able to ask that. That's my personal view. He has to protect the sanctity of the court in a situation like this. Mr. Anderson, you're not asking any questions? You're just going to sit there, right? What's that? I might not like it. I know that. This was my social studies teacher in 1978. Okay, he's obviously, I'm not going to like it because we're probably on different political sides. But I just want to say two things about him so he knows I remember everything, okay? He took me to the Statue of Liberty and he took me to Benihana. So those were two cultural experiences. Of course, I was talking in the back of the bus, so he made me sit on the bus for like a half hour, which is fine. I remember it, but I forgive you. Go ahead.
Okay. Do you believe in climate change? And if you do,
yeah,
what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. Okay, so I obviously believe in climate change. This is funny. I'm on the Trump transition team, and I said, in the 5,000 years of Earth's history, I mean human history, they cut it and said Earth's history, and they said I'm a guy that believes that the Earth was created 5,000 years ago. Okay, that's what they do to you. I swear to God they did that to me. Okay, so I believe the Earth is probably 4.5 to 5 million years old, pursuant to the geologists and the scientific data related to the Earth. I'm not one of those biblical interpretists. And I believe that we are affecting the climate. I think there's irrefutable evidence that we're affecting the climate. The problem is, it's very tough to do something about it at the federal level. That's just my honest opinion, because when you sign things like the Paris Accord, what you find, number one, the Paris Accord, if you look through it, it's a 1 or 2 Fahrenheit degree move, not the 3 centigrade move that's needed to really impact the climate. The secondary aspect of it is a tremendous amount of cheating. If you're worried about the US, I can tell you that year over year, our carbon emissions are down. And if Trump was here and he was being honest about it, he would say they're down because the states, particularly states like California and here in New York, have pushed these environmental laws. So we're actually moving in the right direction. But to get a holistic climate deal done, Mr. Anderson, I have no idea how we could do that. But I do know that we have a problem and we have to solve the problem. And so one of the great things about our civilization is every time we think we have this massive problem, we have a tendency to think linearly, but the world is moving exponentially. So let me give you this example. You're in a 100,000-year-old piece of machinery. Your body has not had a software upgrade in 100,000 years. There's been no relative evolution. Okay, that's why we're all getting fat, ladies and gentlemen, okay? Because if we had an evolution, we would be not getting fat. Thomas Malthus, who you remember, he wrote a treatise in the 1840s. He said, this is going to be really bad. The population is growing exponentially. We can only grow the food linearly, and so we're going to starve. It's a Malthusian proposition. But he left out human ingenuity. He left out that potential. Lo and behold, we are dying from obesity-related illnesses and not starvation. Let me give you another example. Back in 1978, we were talking about peak oil theory. When I was in a classroom at Tufts as a junior, my economics professor told me it was game over for oil. By 2010, we'd be out of oil, $2,000, 1985 dollars of oil per barrel. But he left out the exponential growth and the transformational society of science, and lo and behold, we have more oil. We're now a net exporting nation of oil. So what I would like to do, we have to do this at the governmental level, frankly, you need almost a Marshall Plan or a moon launch, sir, on not just renewables, but what to do about the damage that's already done. You know, some guy presented at the World Economic Forum, because I went to the study, I do believe in climate change, putting aerosol in the atmosphere. Remember, we used to be afraid of putting aerosol in the atmosphere, but they say by putting aerosol in the atmosphere, it'll reduce the temperature because it'll have a blocking impact on the sun. I'm not saying we should do that, but what I'm saying is we have to put money into the science of stopping it and reversing it, as opposed to the politics of trying to team up as 7 billion people and forcing a reduction at that level. I just don't think it's going to happen. I'm trying to deal with it realistically as opposed to unrealistically. But I do believe in climate change. Are you proud of me for that? I mean, because, you know, I know you're like I know you're a big time liberal, though. I know you, but it's fine. I love you still, though. I love you still.
I heard a lot from Mrs. Kushner and Ivanka about the maternity leave, and I haven't really heard anything about that lately.
Yeah.
So could fill us in on how it is still in play and how it can be accomplished without raising taxes.
So it's still in play, and so there's something called the Byrd scoring. It was after Senator Robert Byrd, and so if you want to put a social program in like that, they have to find cuts in the program to make it deficit neutral. And so they have a plan that they presented, and they have a redistribution mechanism, but the problem is nothing is happening at the congressional level right now. The north-going Zacks and the south-going Zacks, from a Dr. Seuss children's book, they're doing this to each other, and it's very, very damaging to the society. And so the plan is in place. Mick Mulvaney, if he was here, would say that it would probably get voted on after the election, and it'll be a bipartisan vote. But they don't want to give the president victories like that right now because they don't want him to win re-election. And that's the problem with our society right now. We're more focused on staying in power or gaining power than we are serving people. That's the problem. Yes, sir.
We're over time.
Over time, okay.
So it's 8 o'clock.
All right, so why don't I take 2 more questions? Is that cool? Yes, sir. I'll take 2 more questions. Yeah. All right. All right. No, I'll take 2 more questions, then we'll call it a night. Go ahead.
Political stuff was amazing. It really was. Total honesty, awesome stuff. Quick financial question. You think this market's got some room to run, or do you think we're maxed out?
So I'm worried about the market. I don't want to bore everybody here. We should talk about it afterwards, but I study the market. And I'm going to tell you something that I don't like about the market is there's a lack of liquidity in the markets. So I'll just give you these examples. You're going down 14.25% from November 15th to December 31st. From December 31st to mid-April, you're going up 17 or 18%. Then you're going down 7% in May. Now you're up another 7%. And there's really not a lot of news in the market that should be causing that level of gyration. And so what I think will happen is some financial historian will say, wow, the Volcker rule, again, not to bore everybody, but what happened was the banks went into systemic failure. So Paul Volcker, the former Federal Reserve Chairman, went to President Obama and said, listen, you got to take the proprietary trading capital away from the banks. That will prevent a future systemic failure. And so they did that, but it's now the doctrine of unintended consequences with regulation. They took $375 billion out of the proprietary trading systems, if you will, and now you have all these electronic trading systems that are operating, and when they see large volume, they bid down. And so I'm worried about the market's volatility. I think the market's priced fairly given where interest rates are and where I see earnings. But I am worried that we could end up in a liquidity crisis that could cause a systemic drop in the market like 1987. Okay, take 1 more question. Yes, ma'am, I'll take your question.
So it's glad you brought up the difference between rich and poor Chinese people. I'm curious what you think the government role, if any, is in reducing the gap between rich and poor in this country.
Right. It's a very, very good question. So what is the government's role in reducing the gap between the rich and poor? So obviously I've studied this, and my Republican friends won't like some of my answers, and my Democratic friends will hate some of my answers. But the path to fixing that is not a path of socialism, because socialism, unfortunately, has always been a failed system, because anytime you disalign human incentives and human behavior, and you take them out of the inclinations of how things work, and you try to systematize equality, you create massive inequality. So anytime we've tried to politicize and systematize from the government perspective equality, you have massive inequality, and you have a very thin layer of people at the top, like the Castro brothers or Joseph Stalin, that are living like kings, and everybody else is equally poor. Okay, so you can't go in that direction. I can give you 150 years of economic data that supports my thesis. However, what my Republican friends will not like is that the only way that you can close this gap, it's going to take about 25 years. And you have to do it through a number of different things, and one of them is infrastructure, and one of them is education. At the end of the day, we have a very uneven educational system, and why we can't systematize equality as it relates to income, we should be systematizing equal opportunity. Okay, and if you get a great education here at the Schreiber High School, but a terrible one at an inner city Detroit high school, it's very unfair. Those people did not pick the areas of their birth or their families. And the government, we are a smart enough group of people, okay, and this is a very rich nation, we can figure out a way to systematize that. The healthcare system is an unmitigated disaster. And while Obamacare was part of the solution, we need a much broader based solution on the healthcare side. Now let me tell you something that the Republicans don't like. They don't like when I say this. The healthcare was socialized in 1986. Ronald Reagan socialized the healthcare. Ronald Reagan, what are you talking about? Let me give you the rule. A minor piece of legislation in March of 1986 that Reagan signed said, if you go to the emergency room anywhere in the United States, they have an obligation to treat you. And so what happened was you're getting strep throats and you're getting poor people that are rushing to the emergency room with a sick kid, and thank God those kids are being taken care of in the emergency room. And so the problem with the healthcare system is that we're taking a governmental approach to the healthcare system that has created astronomical pricing on the drugs, astronomical pricing through the insurance programs, and that can be re-engineered. We can increase the supply of doctors. We should have a GI program for doctors, not if you're in the military, but if you want to be a medical doctor, okay, we onboarded 40 million people into the healthcare system without increasing the supply of doctors. So you put all this demand burden on the system without a supply increase. So we can get into it later, but there are many, many things that we can do. Infrastructure, education, and healthcare. We're a rich enough nation where if we can base case everybody out and then give them a roughly equal start at the starting gate, yes, there'll be unequal outcomes and there'll be Jeff Bezos's. We want there to be Jeff Bezos's. He's created an enormous amount of value. Many people in this room use Amazon. They're delivering the product to your doorstep at a low price. He became rich from that. That should be okay in our society. I don't like the class warfare and the class envy. One last point is very, very important. I'll take your question too, I promise. One last point. When you have an attribution of economic rent, that's the profit in the GDP, that's 50-50 between capital and labor, you have a very stable social contract in the system. When that corrupts itself, and right now it's 60 capital, 40 labor in the United States, it's 56-44 in Europe. When it corrupts itself, you get a fraying of the social fabric. We have to figure out, through market forces, not socialism, a way to get it back in line. Teddy Roosevelt went to all those fat cats. Mr. Anderson will tell you this. He went to all those fat cats during the robber baron era, the Gilded Age, and he was the father of progressivism. He was a Republican. The word progressive actually originated in the Republican Party. It's been hijacked now by the left, but the Republicans said, Teddy Roosevelt, knock it off. Stop taking all of the profits for yourself, share the profits. Okay, so they can be, through the forces of good policy, moral suasion, and things like this, we can close the gap. It'll never be perfect. If you're searching for perfection, look inward and look in the mirror. None of us are perfect, and therefore the society will not be perfect. But we can make it a lot better. I'll take this last question right here. Yes?
It's personal. I'd like to know if you have time to sign your book for me.
Okay, we're going to end it on that question, but I want to say something very optimistic. I think it's very, very important for everybody in this room, because if you're watching the news, you get bummed out. Okay, the sources of growth, innovation, and opportunity in the society have never been better. You can dislike President Trump, but he said something at the State of the Union address that's very true. We got to avoid a war. We have to avoid a war, because if we can avoid a war, we can advance our civilization. The age of chemotherapy is dying. There's a systemic rise in immunotherapy that's going to transform the landscape of healthcare. We are going to move into 5G. It's going to transform the society, make it more efficient and better. Don't be afraid of the robotics. Okay? It's anytime we've had a great leap in technological innovation and there's been some temporary job dislocation, it's always led to a more prosperous future. So you got to stay optimistic and stay hopeful, and hopefully we'll get the right policies at some point. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you. Come over here. I'm going to sign your book. I don't have a Sharpie.